This is what happens when you let good cops be cops. The FBI and our partners are proud to stand here today together to bring justice to the family of Charlie Kirk and honor his memory. Last night we had a total of approximately 7,000 7,000 leads. As of this morning, thanks to your great work, we have over 11,000 leads that were called in to the FBI. And we are running out every single lead that we can. Every one of those leads will be run out. The arrest is a testament to the dedication of good law enforcement being great, and partnerships in law enforcement, which I've tried to highlight as my tenure as the director of the FBI. There is no better relationship for law enforcement than the FBI to partner with state and local authorities, and you've seen it here in these last few days.
We are indebted to law enforcement across the state who's worked seamlessly together, local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and our federal partners with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We're grateful for everyone who worked together in such a short amount of time to find this person and to bring justice. I want to thank the public who has been so engaged, reviewing videos, helping us with sending in tips, and helping us get to this point.
They told the public the case was closed before the smoke even cleared. Tyler Robinson was in cuffs within hours, his name plastered across every headline, his mugshot circulating like a trophy of fast justice. The narrative was simple. The threat was caught, the danger was neutralized, and the system had done its job. But here's the problem. Nothing about that job matches the evidence. The rifle they claimed he used couldn't have fired the bullet that was recovered. The ballistics don't line up. The trajectory doesn't line up. Even the witness accounts don't point to him. But instead of stepping back and reassessing, officials doubled down. They had their suspect, they had their story, and they expected the public to move on. But the cracks are no longer cracks, they're fractures. Testimonies thought to be buried are resurfacing. Eyewitnesses who were silenced are speaking again. Internal reports that were once sealed are being leaked. Every new lead tells the same uncomfortable truth. Tyler Robinson may have been the man in custody, but he was never the man behind the shot. And if that's true, then someone else pulled the trigger. And someone else made sure we never looked in their direction. What do you think? Is the case moving forward carefully, or is progress being slowed by procedural delays? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and where are you watching from? To stay updated on every development, subscribe now and turn on notifications so you stay informed as new updates become available. This is Detective Max, and together we will stay on top of the facts. The incident unfolded at a packed event where Charlie Kirk was scheduled to speak, an environment with cameras, security personnel, crowd control, and supposedly airtight protection. Yet, in a matter of seconds, chaos overpowered protocol. A shot was reported, panic rippled through the audience, and security swarmed the area with more urgency than clarity. Within hours, Tyler Robinson was in handcuffs. No press conference, no verified evidence, no forensic breakdown, just a name and a face pushed to the public as the definitive solution to the problem. His photo wasn't introduced as a suspect. It was introduced as the conclusion. People didn't believe he was guilty. They were told he was guilty, and they went along with it. News outlets ran with the narrative before investigators completed even the most basic procedures. There were no confirmed witness identifications. No released footage, no verified motive. The arrest wasn't based on proof, it was based on pressure. A high-profile target was attacked, and the system needed someone to hold up as the source of the threat. And Tyler Robinson, he was easy to present. He had a history that could be twisted into motive. He had a face that could be broadcast without hesitation. His record became the foundation of the case, not the evidence. Nobody asked if he was in the right position to fire. Nobody asked how the recovered round didn't match his weapon. Nobody asked who else was seen fleeing. Instead, the authorities delivered what the public craves after a scandal, a packaged villain. But here's the turning point. When the truth doesn't match the arrest becomes the lie. And every detail surrounding Tyler Robinson is starting to look like exactly that. The first real crack in the story wasn't a confession, a witness, or a camera angle. It was science. When the recovered round was examined, the results didn't align with the weapon Tyler Robinson was said to have used. The barrel markings, the caliber, the ballistic signature, none of it matched. That should have changed everything. Under normal procedure, that kind of mismatch triggers a reset in the investigation. It means the case is either misdirected or incomplete. But this time, nothing stopped, nothing paused, nothing was reconsidered. The most surprising part is that people inside the system know the mismatch is real. Some have quietly acknowledged it off the record. They won't go public, but they won't deny it in private either. So the question becomes, why wasn't he released the moment those tests came back? Why hold someone when the physical evidence separates them from the act they're accused of? Keeping Tyler in custody didn't solve the case. It preserved a narrative. It kept the public calm. It allowed authorities to claim progress. And it protected whoever actually set the events in motion. Because if Tyler Robinson wasn't the one who pulled the trigger, then someone else did, and keeping him in the spotlight made sure the real trail stayed cold. When something unfolds in public, people notice things cameras miss. And on the day of the incident, several people did. 3 spectators gave consistent statements that the shot didn't come from ground level at all. It came from above. They described the angle, the direction of sound, and the way people reacted around them. One of them was so certain he repeated it multiple times to responding officers. It came from higher up. Another witness reported seeing movement on a rooftop just seconds after the noise. Not a crowd, not a scramble, just one figure retreating out of sight. That detail never made it into any official briefing. Then came the most unsettling account, a bystander who insisted they heard 2 firing sources, not an echo, not distortion, but 2 distinct sounds that didn't align with one weapon. These weren't anonymous online rumors. These were formal statements taken on record. And yet those statements didn't shape the investigation. They disappeared into it. Some were marked as incomplete. Others were labeled inconsistent. At least one was allegedly misfiled. Another was redacted entirely before internal review. In any other case, conflicting eyewitness accounts would expand the investigation. Here they narrowed it. Instead of looking up, they looked away. Because if people on the ground saw something different from the official version, then the problem wasn't confusion, it was suppression. For an event involving a high-profile figure, certain precautions are standard. Elevated surveillance, rooftop spotters, aerial monitoring, perimeter sweeps. But on the day Charlie Kirk was targeted, those safeguards were either skipped or intentionally left out. There were no rooftop units assigned. Not a single trained observer positioned above the venue, despite the location being surrounded by accessible vantage points. There were no drones in the air, even though overhead monitoring has become routine at gatherings of this scale. No secondary eyes. No aerial feed, no thermal tracking. And then there was the timing. The person authorities labeled as the shooter was situated in a spot almost too convenient, right where cameras and responders could reach him fastest, but nowhere near where multiple witnesses believed the shot originated. The most jarring part, Tyler Robinson didn't even test positive for gunshot residue in a way that aligned with an active shooter. The trace findings didn't match what would be expected from someone who had just discharged a weapon at close range. In other words, the physical markers weren't there. So, was this a lapse in planning, or was this position carefully staged? Was the absence of surveillance an oversight, or did it prevent the real vantage point from being exposed? Either way, what happened that day wasn't just a breach, it was an opening. And someone benefited from it being there. The moment the recovered round was analyzed, the official story should have shifted. The caliber didn't match the weapon linked to Tyler Robinson. It wasn't a close mismatch or a technicality. The round came from an entirely different class of firearm. That detail alone should have forced investigators to reopen their timeline, re-examine their suspect, and widen the scope. Instead, something else happened. The forensic specialists who conducted the initial analysis were quietly moved off the case. No explanation, no acknowledgement. Their reports weren't corrected, they were buried. Then came the ceiling. Ballistics data, which is typically referenced in pretrial discussions or presented to the defense during discovery, was locked away under the claim of protecting the integrity of the investigation. But protecting it from who? Even Tyler Robinson's own public defender raised the question, if the round doesn't match his weapon, why is he still being held? And more importantly, why is the hard evidence hidden instead of used to clear his name? When a bullet rules someone out, it should end the argument. In this case, it only exposed the agenda, because if the wrong man was charged, that leaves only one unanswered question: who was the round meant to shield and why? The most revealing details didn't come from headlines or press briefings. They came from people who were there, working behind the scenes. A member of the security team quietly admitted that a second individual was briefly detained immediately after the incident. He wasn't processed, photographed, or logged in the official chain of custody. He was held, questioned off record, and then released without documentation. No name, no description, no follow-up. Then there was the vendor. Stationed near a restricted access point, they claimed to have seen a man exiting through a staff-only doorway just moments after the incident. He wasn't panicked. He wasn't escorted. He moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where to go and how to avoid attention. That statement was taken, and then it vanished. None of this appeared in the official press release. No mention of a secondary detainment, no acknowledgement of alternate suspects, no reference to anyone leaving the secure perimeter immediately after the shot was reported. Instead, the narrative stayed clean. One suspect, one arrest, one story. But when people inside the operation start contradicting what was presented to the public, the issue isn't misinformation, it's omission, and omissions don't happen by accident. The official version of events places Tyler Robinson at the scene in the moments leading up to the shot, but the timeline tells another story. Multiple attendees reported seeing him on the opposite side of the venue just minutes before the incident took place. Not near the speaker platform. Not near the supposed firing location. He was walking, not hiding, and not behaving like someone preparing to carry out an attack. Then came the digital trail. Phone data places him outside the immediate line of fire at the exact time the shot was heard. His device pinged a different section of the venue, far enough to raise serious doubts about his physical ability to carry out the act. And just when those details should have forced a pause in the case, something else surfaced. The surveillance footage covering the area where he was reportedly standing went dark. Not the whole system, just the segment tracking that section. The gap in recording aligns almost perfectly with the window of the incident. The combination is hard to ignore. Witnesses place him away from the scene. His phone corroborates it. The only cameras that could verify it stopped recording at the crucial moment. In a legitimate investigation, that would raise alarms. Here it just raised silence. At first, Tyler Robinson's defense followed the obvious route: challenge the accusation, demand evidence, and push for dismissal based on the ballistic mismatch. But then something shifted. Instead of attacking the weakness of the case, his legal team began steering toward a different strategy: mental capacity and mitigation. They weren't arguing innocence anymore. They were preparing for damage control. That pivot didn't come from nowhere. Normally, when evidence separates a client from a crime, the defense goes aggressive: demand disclosure, push for release, and expose inconsistencies. But here the argument turned passive, focused on evaluations, psychological reviews, and negotiations behind closed doors. The question is why? Was the defense pressured into silence? Were they offered a deal that traded truth for leniency? Or were they warned that pushing too hard would expose more than just a wrongful arrest? Even those close to the case have noticed the shift. Instead of clearing his name, they're containing him. Instead of dismantling the narrative, they're working around it. And when a lawyer stops fighting the facts, it usually means the facts threaten someone bigger than the client. When official reports stay quiet, the truth has a way of leaking from the edges. And that's exactly what started happening behind this case. A federal contact hinted, off the record, that Tyler Robinson was never expected to stand trial as the actual shooter. He was what they called a placeholder. Someone to hold the story together long enough for the public to move on. Another source revealed that his name was circulated internally before the ballistic review was even completed. In other words, the suspect was chosen before the evidence was analyzed. Even more telling, two officers connected to the early investigation have declined to speak publicly. Not because they're unsure, because they're reportedly under non-disclosure agreements. Law enforcement officers don't usually need NDAs to talk about a standard arrest. They need them when the story isn't standard at all. These aren't rumors from internet threads. These are controlled leads from people close enough to know the difference between a mistake and a narrative. When insiders whisper instead of testify, it's not because the truth is unclear. It's because the truth is being managed. If Tyler Robinson didn't fire the shot, then the question shifts from blame to design. Because someone still triggered the event, and someone benefited from how it played out. The official story leans on the idea of a lone attacker with unclear intentions. But when the evidence doesn't connect to the man in custody, motive becomes a floating piece with no anchor. So what does that leave? Some believe the goal was to create chaos, not a casualty. Others think the target wasn't the person on stage, but the message of fear that followed. And then there's the possibility nobody wants to say out loud, that the event was never meant to end in prosecution, just performance. Without a confirmed shooter, every theory gains ground. Was this a staged threat to justify new policies, funding, or security powers? Was someone trying to send a message without being discovered? Or was a real attempt made, and the wrong man was used to close the file before harder questions surfaced? The most uncomfortable part. The story only works if people stop asking who actually pulled the trigger. The moment that question stays alive, the narrative collapses. Because if Tyler Robinson didn't do it, someone else did. And that someone has managed to stay invisible while he carries the blame. The official version of events was delivered like a finished script: one suspect, one arrest, one resolution. But that narrative is starting to split open, and it isn't the public creating doubt. It's the evidence, the witnesses, and the silence from the people who should be talking. Testimonies once ignored are resurfacing. Individuals who were dismissed as confused now sound consistent with one another. Documents marked as sealed are being referenced in ways that suggest they're more revealing than reported. A private investigator connected to the aftermath claims there is footage that never made it into evidence. Logs footage showing movement in areas authorities never searched. Another source says venue staff were instructed not to speak about what they saw near the service exits. Even relatives of Tyler Robinson, who know his history better than the headlines, are questioning how quickly the case was declared solved. They aren't defending a perfect man. They're asking a basic question: if the evidence doesn't match, why does the story stay the same? The deeper you look, the less it resembles a mistake, and the more it looks like maintenance, a story held together because letting it collapse would point to someone else entirely. And when a narrative needs protection, it's never the truth it's guarding, it's the people behind it. The deeper this case is examined, the clearer one fact becomes: Tyler Robinson wasn't the shooter. The evidence that should have cleared him was buried. The testimonies that could have redirected the investigation were ignored. And the narrative that named him responsible was protected more aggressively than the truth itself. The bullet that was recovered didn't match his weapon. The position he was accused of firing from doesn't align with where witnesses placed him moments earlier. His phone data breaks the timeline. The footage that could either confirm or clear him conveniently cuts out. And the people who saw something different weren't just overlooked, they were silenced by omission. So why is he still the name tied to the incident? Because shutting a case quickly looks cleaner than solving it accurately. Because headlines crave closure. Because the appearance of resolution is sometimes more valuable to the system than accountability. If Tyler Robinson didn't fire that shot, someone else did. Someone who walked away while the wrong man was put in front of the cameras. Someone whose involvement was erased the moment his name was inserted. And that means the real question isn't whether Tyler Robinson is innocent, it's who needed him to look guilty. Until that answer is confronted, the case isn't closed, it's concealed.